Hi there, my name's Adam Goodrich and I'm the CEO of Procedural Worlds. With this talk, at a high level, I'll give you an insight to how I started and got into this industry. I'll talk about what procedural generation is and what I think is important about procedural generation. I'll talk about Gaia and an insight that I had that's changed the entire industry. Then I'll talk about Storm and how we're looking to solve large world rendering at Earth scale. Then finally, I'll talk a little bit about procedural content generation and generative AI and how I think procedural content will go in the future. So a little bit about me. I'm an enterprise tech with over 30 years of experience, and I've worked on lots of different things. My focus has largely been startups, and I've done them both here in Australia and over in the US as well. The most successful startup was a digital agency that we built to about 100 people and sold just before the GFC. This was an awesome moment in my life because I had the opportunity to stop and think about what made me happy. And the two things that I'm fascinated with are human behavior and how we can help people to get better behaviors, and then also technology. So as part of that research, I started to explore 3D, and I found that I really loved it. And that actually led me to turning it into a business, and that is what Procedural Worlds is now. Procedural Worlds specializes in procedural content generation, and our aim is to make it easy for anybody to create beautiful worlds regardless of their skill level. Procedural generation is the algorithmic generation of content through the iteration and execution of simple rule sets. And what makes it so interesting is that what you get is emergent. So when you're thinking about procedural generation, it's really about the study of nature. And what I've found is that water has one of the biggest impacts on how your environment is shaped and what's inside of it. Then when you're thinking about an environment over time, you also need to think about how do animals and people impact that environment. Have you ever seen a perfectly clean city? A city is actually a mixture of old and new, and it's got the detritus and grime of millennia. And then the other thing when you think about procedural generation is that the world around us is actually chaotically ordered. So if you're doing procedural generation well, then you're actually creating really immersive and beautiful environments. If you're doing it poorly, then something just feels off. Our subconscious picks up on it. When thinking about how procedural generation works, and a lot of our systems work this way, what we're doing is we're actually mixing different types of fractal noise at different frequencies, and then using some sort of algorithm to express that into the world. Fractals are interesting in that they tend to mimic the way nature works. So why procedural generation? Well, if you've ever tried to create a world of even 1 kilometre square, there is a huge amount of work involved. You have to shape the terrain, texture it, plant every single tree, place every single thing. And this is a hugely time and labor intensive and expensive process. And that just gets larger as the environments get bigger. So what we're actually doing with procedural generation is we're automating the placement of all of that content using these rule sets. And I call it the 80-20 rule. You know, the artist does that 20% that is the magic that makes it interesting. And then your procedural algorithms will then go in and fill in the blanks. The aha moment that changed an industry. This is a bit of a euphemism, but it's actually true. So before I created Gaia, I created 2 different systems, and both of them were based on fractal noise. And when I put them in front of artists, I kind of watched their eyes roll back in their head as they just didn't get it. And the reason is that fractals are not intuitive at all. They're extremely hard to control. So one day I was creating this environment and I created this interesting fractal mountain. And the problem was that the mountain wasn't where I want it to be. And this is always the problem with fractals. They look great, but they're just not quite right. So I wondered, wouldn't it be cool if you could actually just snip that out and treat the mountain itself as a 3D object that you could rotate and scale and place wherever you wanted in a replicable way? And then because I was working with height maps and going, well, how would you think about this? And then I thought, well, maybe the analogy is that your terrain is like cookie dough. And then you can take that shape and stamp it into the cookie dough, just like you do when you're baking cookies. So this concept of stamping shapes into terrain was the aha moment, and it then took me another 9 months to create the first version of Gaia. And when I published it into the Unity Asset Store in 2015, it immediately went to the top of the Asset Store, which was quite cool, and it's pretty much stayed in the most popular assets on the Asset Store ever since. And then the interesting thing, I suppose, is that this concept has been widely copied across game engines. Unity has built it into their engine, Unreal's built it into the engine, and pretty much everybody who creates world-building tools now has this concept of a stamp, and the reason is it's just so intuitive. I've talked quite a bit, so now let's actually look at procedural content generation in action, and I'll showcase how Gaia and some of our tools are actually working together to create beautiful environments in a range of different styles. Okay, now I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of Gaia and how quick and easy it is to create something from nothing in very, very short amounts of time. I'll go to Window, Procedural Worlds, Gaia, Show Gaia Manager. Gaia has a wizard-based workflow to make it easier to set up the scene. I'm just going to choose all the defaults for now. I'm going to use my World Designer workflow, or I could use manual with Stamper, but I'll just stick with this. I use my Alpine biome, and I'm targeting desktop. So let's just go create World Designer. Let's pop that out the road. So what Gaia has done is created a low poly visualization of the environment that it would create for you. I could go in here and I could change the shape of my world and the different tech and the different settings for it. I'll leave it as is. And I'll go into my world detail. We can choose whether we want more plains or valleys and mesas, mills, hills, and so on. But again, I'll just leave that at the same. And if I don't like this shape, then I can just randomize. And it gives me a new terrain. I could go randomize all and it'll actually choose different types of features as well. Yeah, just do once more. Yeah, that's a very harsh environment. Might just do another one. Okay, that's a pretty interesting environment. Let's go generate world. What Gaia is doing now is setting up all of the Unity assets and setting up the terrain and creating your initial version, textured version of the world. Just because I like the visuals, I'm going to go back into Gaia's Manager and now I'm going to create a runtime. I'm going to use a Unity, our fly cam, but we could use various other types of controllers. And I'm going to use some daytime lighting. and Unity's HDRP water, and we'll add some wind and other little utilities to the scene as well. So if I pop this out the road, what's rather cool is instantly we've set up your scene for you. At this point, I can actually press play and we have a workable scene. Here we are in our environment. You know, it's okay. Let's add some more land here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Gaia. I'm going to go to my advanced settings, go back to my terrain tools, and I'm going to add a stamper. Now this is the thing I was telling you about before that we actually invented. So here I have a stamp. Let's choose a stamp of a mesa because they're kind of interesting shapes. And here you can see the stamp. And let's just flip around till I find something that's more interesting. That's pretty cool. Let's see what else we've got here. All right. So we can move this over here. We can rotate it, and we can, you know, shrink it, and so on and so on. And I'll just go into I'm going to add some masks here, and I'm going to create a distance mask. So Gaia has this incredible masking system and does a lot of its work with masking. So I'm just going to set a circle, make it world. And what's actually happening is now Gaia will only modify the environment if it's above a certain level. Make that global. There you go. Local. And so I can actually get in and move this around. One of the little tricks that that's worth using is the trick of perspective. So I'll make this a little bit flatter. In fact, I might just push it down a bit, make the overall feature a bit flatter. And the terrain itself is not that big. Maybe just rotate it a bit more. There you go. Let's stamp that into our environment. So this is that whole visual process I was telling you about before. There we go. Turn off my preview. And we've now got this another interesting little bit of area here. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually select my biome. And this is all of the rules that Gaia uses to texture, populate, and so on this terrain. In fact, if we wanted to look at an individual biome, let's look at our tree biome. What we've actually got here is all of the settings for how we apply this tree into our environment. We have this concept of fitness, which is where we look at each part of the terrain and decide if it's good to spawn on, have a bunch of different masking. And each of these rule sets, when I select spawn, will actually run one after the other. And in fact, Gaia can even allow you to visualize where these trees would consider spawning. You can choose another one there. So you can see we're spawning different trees and different locations. So I'm going to go back to my biome and spawn all of this in one big hit. Now this is a huge amount of work if you did it manually, and essentially we're doing all of this in one quick spawn. So there we go. We've got some trees here, a nice little environment. We've added in some grass. Now let's just add in a road. So I'm going to go, and this time we're using another tool of ours called Gina, and I'm going to add a road spline, and I'm just going to click into my environment here and create a road up the valley, maybe through the trees, over the hill, and maybe what else I want to do? Maybe grab this one and build another road through there. And I'm going extremely quickly here because I realize we've only got a short amount of time, but I'm going to now carve this road into the terrain so it cuts in nicely. Boom. Then I'm going to clear any colliders and anything else that might have gotten on there. And we've run that. Then I'm going to run my clear trees, and it'll make sure that any trees that we've spawned through are gone. Then I'm going to run my clear clear details. I must have moved that around. That gets rid of any grass. And finally, I'm going to texture this road. And let's have a look at what we got. Sometimes we'll get a little glitch here where everything's not quite right. So we usually just fix that up manually, or we could actually go back to our road, and we could also go into our road here, and we could just snap it to the ground. Yep. There we go. Now the road is really beautifully snapping to our environment. Last thing I'll do to this before I hit play again is I will add some additional details to this. I'm going to add some traffic lights. What's the wrong one? I wanted street lamps, not traffic lights. Pop that there. We've now got a new spawner. If I click on this, you can see we've got a visualization of where they'd be spawned. We don't want that many. Let's make them once every 20 meters. And we'll push them off to the side of the road. And then it's all looking pretty good. Let's go spawn. Boom. And now what we've done is we've put our traffic lamps in here, but they're all pointing in the wrong direction. So I'm just going to get these lamps. I'm going to go align to spline, align children, and then flick them around. And they will now align nicely with the road. So let's hit play and see what we got. So here we've got our environment. We've got our road cutting down through the trees here. And some nice water. And obviously you can tweak this, the settings and so on to suit the level of hardware that you're running this on. But you know what we've done in a very, very short amount of time is created a great starting point for a game. Now that you've seen Gaia, I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It's an all-in-one plugin for Unity 3D that makes it easy and fast to create beautiful worlds. I launched it in 2015, and it's done exceptionally well. It's used broadly across industry, and it's capable of creating worlds in a range of different styles for a range of different devices. The core concept behind Gaia is that you shape your terrain, you populate it with spawners, and spawning is the process of applying assets into your environment using those procedural rule sets that I told you about. Then you add your runtime and you press play. I've been a user of the Asset Store since 2012 and a publisher on the Asset Store since 2015. If you do create an asset that's successful, then it's a great place to get known. So we were recognized by Intel a couple of years ago as one of their global graphics innovators. We ended up creating a version of Gaia called Gaia ML, which we integrated with their inference engines. The other thing the Asset Store does from a business perspective is it opens doors. So as a result of our work on the Asset Store, we've worked for companies like BMW, Google, Wargaming, and a whole bunch of others to create really interesting projects and things which draw on our specific strengths in procedural generation. The other thing about working on the Asset Store is if you work to build trust with Unity, then Unity will do a lot to try and help you succeed. They'll open doors, they'll invite you to events, they'll give you access to information, and all of this ultimately leads to more sales. And another cool benefit of the Asset Store is that you can meet and collaborate with some of the gods of the gaming industry, and that's been a real highlight for me personally, having a gaming background. So the interesting trend that's happening in the industry is that people want larger environments, richer environments, and they want more of them. And the challenge is first that the game engines don't really support that, and next, most people don't have the skill to do that. But we've been focusing on this problem for years, so we've built that skill. So Storm is a system that we've created. Its core module is a render module, and it can do massive environments at up to 100 times the frame rate you can get from Unity. It also has both design time and runtime support. It can ingest mapping data, it can ingest Unity data, like your standard old terrains and so on. And then what we're going to be adding to it over the time is additional modules that do procedural city generation, dungeon generation, roads and rivers and all that sort of thing. So let me show you Storm in action. I'm now going to show you Arketype. An archetype is a wrapper around Storm, and it's the next iteration of our world building tools beyond Gaia and Storm. The idea behind Arketype is it's all about allowing anybody to create, explore, and share worlds. So let me jump in and let's go and look at an existing world which is being rendered by Storm. I'm going to go to the real world. This is going to actually load up a real part of the world, in this case, Germany. So here is a sneak peek of Arketype, and what's actually going on here is the environment itself is being rendered by Storm. So let me give a sense of what this can do. First thing you'll notice is incredible draw distances and pretty incredible performance. So this area is somewhere in Germany. It's a real world environment. And here we've got the world down underneath us. Some of the things that are coming to Storm is large environmental generation, real-time streaming, the ability to bring in mapping or GIS information, and then a rather neat ability to render that in a really rich way. Often when you go down to ground level, when you're doing satellite work, the actual ground itself ends up looking like this terrible blurry blob. But as I go in and in here, you'll see that the terrain is getting more and more detail. We're actually procedurally augmenting the environment while still keeping the features that came through with the mapping information. So let's talk about some of the other capabilities of Storm. First of all, the ability to swap and control biomes at runtime. I'm going to go into settings here. I'm going to go to my vegetation, and I'm going to choose a different biome. Let's choose meadow forest. And there we have a meadow forest, the same basic environment. Then we can choose, say, our realistic beech forest. And here we have a very different biome. And again, you know, big scale. Then let's choose, say, our low poly environment here. Now, what's interesting about this is we've redone the texturing and we're accelerating this low fidelity environment. The idea here is to be able to support massive acceleration, not only in desktop and console, but also in mobile as well. So let's just go back to my dry pine forest. I quite like this. One of the other awesome things that we have with Storm is the ability to control each different facet of the environment at runtime. So if I didn't have as powerful a machine, I could actually bring my tree distances right back in or push them right back out. I can change my grass, my plants, and so on. If I go down to ground level here and change the density of the objects, increase that up. Oops, I changed the draw distance. Let's change our density. And all of a sudden, we're spawning a heck of a lot more interesting stuff into our environment here. And some of the other things that are coming with this technology as well. If I go in here and I want to, it's the wrong one. If I want to go into my edit settings here, this is an example of the new procedural building technology. So we've got buildings, we've got cities, and even dungeons. So let's have a quick look at that. First thing I'll do is I'll create a city. Now, in this particular demo, we haven't got roads plugged in yet, but in the system itself, we now do have roads. So let me just click on this. So we've just procedurally built a city. In fact, we're still building it. And the idea is that Storm is not only accelerating the vegetation and the environment around you and having this massive draw distance, but it's going to accelerate built environments as well. So let's wander over here. We've got our little city here built out of modular pieces. And let's also build a dungeon. And in fact, let's go for a wander and have a look at our dungeon. Let's drop into our first person controller. And let's go have a look. So I'm teleported into my dungeon. This is just a staging area here. And let's put my torch on. And let's go and find our little dungeon entrance. Here we go. So this dungeon system is able to take any sort of modular system. And it's able to do interiors. I don't have, in this particular version, very good interiors, but it shows you that we do have them. And the later versions of this have multi-level caverns, curvy corridors, and all sorts of things. And we can make these out of any procedural, any modular pack. I'll just pop my torch back out, go back to my fly cam. Now the next thing I want to do is actually show you the interior part of buildings as well. So if I bring and build this, put this building here. Here we go, pop that out the road. In fact, I'll bring it back. It's a very bland looking building, but what's going on here is particularly powerful. So let's open up our building and see what's inside of it. Pull that out, pull that down, and you can actually see, I might just pop into first person mode again, turn off editing, and if I go over here, maybe turn my torch on and change the time of day. So let's go and have a look inside of our little building here. You can see we've got some stairs. It's actually a perfectly usable interior. Got rooms, go upstairs and downstairs. And in a later version of this, we've now also got all of your furniture and that sort of stuff going on. That ability to create buildings with interiors as well is a very powerful feature. And we can build that into the cities as well. It really depends on the performance you want. But what you start to end up doing with Storm is actually having this ability to create really massive environments and to make them run really, really well. All right, so I demonstrated cities, buildings, dungeons, different biomes, all done at runtime and in real time, and pretty amazing draw distances and performance. So when talking about the sorts of problems that Storm can solve, we recently had a metaverse customer that had a massive world, something like 900 1-kilometer square terrains. The world was running very, very poorly and it was incomplete. So what we did is we used Gaia and various other tools from the asset store to build out that world for the customer. And we used procedural content to automate a lot of that process. So then what we did was we plugged in Storm to accelerate that world. And we were able to do the detailing and the biome creation in about a week. Now, if you were to do that manually on 900 kilometers squared, that is an incredible amount of work. So Storm not only did the work in a fraction of the time that you could do it with other tools, but it also accelerated the world from about 10 frames a second to 80 frames a second. What's coming next is generative AI, and I believe that this will change the industry in the next 5 years. With large language models and stable diffusion models, we can now create a range of content that was never possible before. And in fact, you can see some of our research on the screen. I showed you Arketype before. That is an archetype scene that I've reimagined in a medieval style. And then the little code snippet up there is a system that I built where I said, create me a game about flies. The system built me a game design document, and that went away and built most of the code for that game. This is mind-boggling. But the thing is, you need to control that. And I think the interesting space is the juxtaposition of procedural or algorithmic systems and these large language and diffusion systems. So at Procedural Worlds, we are investing heavily into this space, and we will continue to bring powerful tools to market that are really all about helping people to create amazing content and amazing games, sims, and digital twins, regardless of their skill level. Okay, so thank you very much for taking the time to allow me to share what we're working on and where we're going. If you'd like to learn more, then please reach out to me. We'd love to work with you. Thank you.